I am recording. Yes, we are back, the little
Woohoo!
rascals.
Yeah.
Yes, for the second edition of Witch, as Ariman the Great is on the quest to find a bride, a witch, as he calls a black witch,
A dark witch?
a dark witch,
Oh,
yes.
it's a little more
Yeah.
A,
specific.
a dark witch who can
A
perform
little
the
different. That's a little different.
blackest magic and the wickedest witch of Darkington Hall. A Toadcaster, actually, is what it's called. So we are now on chapter 4. This is our second installment, and we're so excited to be back. So we've already got everybody in place to start, and Melanie goes first. And Melanie, when you are ready, start. You can kick it off.
All right, sounds good. Chapter 4. Mr. Ledbetter was very fond of watching television. In spite of his little stump of a tail, he was a very ordinary person, and when the magic and going-ons in Darkington were too much for him, he liked to go quietly to his room and watch the box. One of Mr. Ledbetter's favorite programs was the Miss World competition. Mr. Ledbetter knew, of course, that it was silly for the girls to let themselves be prodded and measured like cows or turnips in the agriculture show, but all the same, he was very much liked. All the contestants coming from different countries and staying together at a hotel and appearing first in their national costumes, and then in their evening dresses, and then in their swimsuits. And when the most beautiful one climbed onto the platform and had a crown,
Okay, put on her head, Mr. Ledbetter always felt a lump come to his throat. Now, when it was decided to hold a competition for the blackest witch of Toadcaster, Mr. Ledbetter decided to organize it rather in the way that the Miss World contest was organized. Not, of course, that he thought of making the witches parade in their swimsuits. Even before he saw Mother Bloodwort and Mabel Rack and Ethel Feedbag, he had not thought of that. But it seemed to him a good idea that the witches should be brought together in a hotel first and get their clothes and their table manners sorted out before they got to Darkington. Above all, he wanted to make sure that they knew the rules and that no hanky-panky went on between them. Any witch casting a spell on another witch was to be disqualified immediately. So he rented the Grand Spa Hotel on the outskirts of Todcaster. It was a very grand hotel with a cocktail lounge and a ballroom and a terrace with stripy deck chairs, and the
That sounds cool.
manager, who was quite used to conferences of politicians and school teachers and clergymen, rather welcomed the idea of a conference of witches. But after his first day there, Mr. Ledbetter began to feel that he had made, a terrible mistake. Mother Bloodwort and the Shouter Twins and Ethel Feedbag, okay,
did not behave like Miss Kenya and Miss Belgium and Miss USA. In fact, Mr. Leaderbetter said to Lester, who had come to help him, if it wasn't for Belladonna, he'd have a good mind to chuck the whole thing and let Ariman get on with choosing his own wife. Belladonna, who had arrived earlier, carrying a straw basket with her toothbrush, her nightdress, and the magic mirror, had been wonderful. It was Belladonna who had tactfully removed Ethel Feedbag's wellies and hosed them down in the pantry when the manager complained about the manure on his carpet. It was Belladonna who tapped Mother Bloodwort's tin with the coronation on the lid and persuaded the old woman that at the best hotels one did not come down to dinner in a cloud of flies. And when Mabel Rack got into the bath fully clothed because her legs were drying out, causing Doris, who liked to be alone, to squirt her all over with inky fluid, it was Belladonna who cleaned up the mess, carried the irritated animal to her own bathroom, and quieted her. Not that she got any thanks for it. Makes my blood boil, said Lester, the way those witches talk to you. Oh, well, said Belladonna. It's hard for them, me being,
Go ahead.
They were in the office, which the manager had kindly lent to Mr. Ledbetter, snatching a quick cup of tea. Lester, who'd been badly hit by the sight of the witches in daylight, was prowling around looking for a sword to swallow. Mr. Ledbetter, like everyone who organizes things, was shuffling his papers and worrying. Maybe you're just fancying yourself white, Lester went on. He found the manager's umbrella, looked at it, and put it down again. There wasn't any real skill in swallowing umbrellas, and if they came unfurled inside, it could be messy. I'm afraid not, said Belladonna. As usual, she was looking into the magic mirror which she carried with her everywhere. Ariman was sitting hunched up in what seemed to be a broom cupboard. Try, said Lester, who'd set his heart on Belladonna as mistress of Darkington Hall. Look, see that typewriter on the desk? But if you really put your mind to it, you could turn it into a nest of vipers or something. I mean, you've got to believe in yourself. Belladonna sighed. She knew it was useless, but she hated disappointing people. So she got up and felt in the pocket of her skirt for a magic wand or something of the sort. There wasn't anything, of course, only a handful of healing herbs, the identity disc of a carrier pigeon who was playing truant.
Who was playing truant from his loft, and a baby field mouse. So she put everything back and just closed her eyes, waved her arms over the typewriter, and thought of the blackest things she could think of, such as uncooked liver and shoelaces and open graves. Then she stepped back. Oh dear, said Mr. Ledbetter. Though a typewriter had not turned into a nest of vipers, it had turned into a pot of pink begonias, charming, sweetly scented flowers, each cradling a golden bee. Pretty, said the ogre gloomily. I told you, said Belladonna, very much embarrassed. He turned the typewriter back again and picked up the magic mirror. How dreadfully the great man would despise her if he knew. Still sulking, is he? Said Lester. Oh, no, he could never sulk, said Belladonna. But he hasn't perhaps been very tearful lately. You could say that again, said the ogre. And indeed, ever since he had seen the choice of future brides at the coven, Ariman had been in a terrible state. He woke screaming from dreadful nightmares, babbling of fly-covered whiskers chasing him down corridors. He was off his food, his mustache had begun to molt, and he hounded the wizard watcher unmercifully, sending the poor beast out to the gate long before daybreak in a last desperate hope that the
new wizard might still come and he would cancel the competition. I can't help but wondering why he's sitting in a broom cupboard, said Belladonna. I'll tell you why, said Lester, frowning. Because he's waiting for Sir Simon. That's why. Favorite spot of Sir Simon's, the broom cupboard. Is that the rather dead-looking gentleman he speaks of sometimes? Inquired Belladonna. Lester nodded. Very dead-looking. Dead in 1583, he said. Murdered all 7 of his wives. Mr. Ledbetter put down his papers and came over, and together the ogre and the secretary looked over Belladonna's shoulder at their employer. Sure enough, a wavering shadow appeared on the surface of the mirror, and Ariman rose eagerly to his feet. I don't see it, said Lester, shaking his enormous head. He's been trying to bring Sir Simon back to life for years, but since the coven, he's been at it all the time. When I brought him the egg this morning, he was sitting up in bed with a huge book. Necromancy, it was called. Nasty. I wouldn't worry, Mr. Ledbetter. I believe it's 200 years since anyone managed to raise a ghost, but he was a little more anxious than he admitted. Suppose that Ariman did manage it. A man who had murdered all 7 of his wives.
All 7 of his wives did not seem to be a good person to have around in a house where there was soon to be a wedding. An hour later, the witches were all assembled in the cocktail lounge of the hotel, waiting for Mr. Ledbetter to tell them the rules of the contest. They had taken a lot of trouble to make themselves smart. Mabel Rack had plaited her frizzy hair with a string of dogfish egg cases. Mother Bloodworth's chin sprouted a brand new bandage, and Ethel Feedback had nobly left her wellies upstairs and was in slippers. "Are we all here?" said Mr. Ledbetter, letting his eyes rest for a moment on Belladonna, sitting quietly apart from the others on a stool. "No," said Nancy Shooter, jangling her knuckle-bone earrings. "Silly old Marmot, not here." Mr. Ledbetter sighed. Miss Swamp had sent in her entrance form, but so far there had been no sign of her, and he had a person who hated muddle. "No point in her going in for a competition anyway," said Mabel Rack. "A flabby old banshee like that. And the sheep of hers? Give me your bottle," said Ethel Feedback. The others nodded. It was true that Percy really was a most depressing animal, the kind that always thinks.
Okay, other sheep are having a better life than he is, and eating greener grass, and doing more. "Well, we shall have to begin without her," said Mr. Ledbetter. But just then the hotel porter came in and whispered something to Mr. Ledbetter, whose face brightened. "Oh, show her in, please," he said. "We're expecting another lady." But the new witch didn't seem to be someone showed in. The new witch came striding in like a queen. And as she came, the other witches shrank back in their chairs, and Belladonna drew in her breath. Because the new witch was not Monolith. Nothing less like the pale, sickly Miss Swamp could be imagined. The new witch was very tall, with black hair piled high on her head. She had long, blood-red fingernails, and round her shoulders she wore a cape of puppy skin.
Oh.
Her fingers and wrists sparkled with jewels, but the necklace wound round her throat was unexpectedly not of pearls or diamonds, but of human teeth. But what startled the others most was the new witch's familiar. Dragging behind her on a rhinestone-studded lead, there came a gray, lumbering animal with a snout like a hoover and wicked-looking claws. "What is it?" whispered Mother Bloodroot, who could never scrape up enough money to go to the zoo.
"I think it's an aardvark," Belladonna whispered back. "Good evening," said New Witch. "I am Madame Olympia, and I have come to take part in the competition." "I'm afraid there's been some mistake," said Mrs. Ledbetter. "The competition is limited to the Witches of Toadcaster." Madame Olympia smiled a smile that sent shivers down one's spine. Oh, I am a witch of Toadcaster," she said. "Well, how can that be?" began Mr. Ledbetter. "I have bought Mrs. Gwendolyn Swamp's house." "Creepy corner," interrupted a newcomer, dropping the rhinestone lead carelessly on the chair. "Too small for me, of course, but not without charm. Miss Swamp found she wanted to travel." "Uh, uh, Monalot never wanted to travel," said Mother Bloodworth stoutly. "Travel brought out in her spots and all sorts. It was all you could do to get Monalot down the road for a bag of bull eyes." "Well, she is traveling now, however," said Madame Olympia, with another one of her sinister smiles. "Oh, yeah, she is definitely traveling now. Somewhere around Turkey, I would guess." She opened her crocodile skin handbag and began to powder her nose. And when she saw the vain, proud look that Madame Olympia threw at herself in the
Mirror, Belladonna suddenly understood what kind of a person the new witch was. She was an enchantress, one of the oldest and most evil kind of witch there is. Morgan Le Fay, the one who caused the death of the great King Arthur, was one, and Circe, who turned brave Ulysses' men to swine. Enchantresses are beautiful, but it is an evil beauty. They use it to snare men and make them helpless, and tear from them the secrets of their power. And when they have got all they want from them, they destroy them. "Well, madam, I suppose you had better let me have your entrance form," said Mr. Ledbetter. Fair was fair, and if the new witch now lived in Todcaster, she was eligible to join. But he felt very unhappy as he wrote her name down on the register. Mr. Ledbetter didn't know much about enchantresses, but there was something about Madame Olympia that made his blood run cold. Not only was Madame Olympia not a witch of Todcaster, she wasn't a witch of the North at all. She lived in London, where she kept a beauty parlor. It was a wicked place. Stupid women were lured into it and assured they would become young and beautiful if they let themselves be pummeled and pounded and smeared with sticky creams and have their faces lifted and their stomach flattened. They paid a lot of money to Madame Olympia.
Okay.
Madame Olympia, who would put a little bit of magic into the creams and ointments that she used, so that at first they did look marvelous. But it was the kind of magic that wore off very quickly, leaving the women even uglier than before, so that they would rush back to her and pay her more money, and the whole thing would start again. She was also horrid to the girls she employed and paid them too little and bullied them. Madame Olympia had had 5 husbands. All these husbands had disappeared in very odd ways, mostly after they had made wills leaving all of their money to her. She said that they had died, but it was odd that a werewolf was with weak blue eyes and a bald patch had appeared in Epping Forest, very much frightening the inhabitants just after she had reported her first husband's death. The second and third husbands had vanished within a year of each other, and each time the girls in the beauty parlor were struck by the way Madame's necklace of human teeth suddenly got very much longer. The fourth Mr. Olympia really did run his Jaguar into a lamppost, but the fifth, well, no one knew for certain what had happened to him, but the coffin in which he was carried to his funeral was most suspiciously light. And now he was after Ariman the Awful, Wizard of the North.
Okay.
As soon as she heard of the competition, she had come straight up to Todcaster and persuaded Monalot to sell her house. Monalot hadn't wanted to go, of course. She sobbed and moaned and pleaded. After all, she wasn't a banshee for nothing. But by the time Madame Olympia had suggested just a few of the things she might do to her and to Percy, if she didn't, Monalot had been very glad to sell her house and take a nice package tour around the world. Very glad indeed. Mr. Ledbetter had begun to explain the rules of the competition. The witches were to wear black gowns and masks so that the judges would not go by the way they looked, but by the blackness of their magic. They were to draw numbers out of a hat and to do their tricks in the order that they drew. They were to hand in a list of anything they might need for the contest: dragons, blood, sieves to go to the sea, and so on, so that they would be ready in good time. Madame Olympia had hardly bothered to listen. One look at the other witches, and she had known she would win. The little golden-haired thing was quite fetching, but anyone could see what was wrong with her. Oh, yes. She'd be Queen of Darkington, all right. And then, hardly waiting for Mr. Ledbetter to finish, she rose to her feet and stretched. "See that?" My aardvark is watered and fed, please, she ordered carelessly. I'm going to change for dinner.
Okay.
And she glided out of the room, leaving the other witches boiling and bubbling in indignation. Cocky, sneering cow. She thinks she is, said Nancy Shooter. Hope she drops dead. And for once, her twin agreed with her. It was a long time before Belladonna slept that night. Dinner had been excellent, but even before the bandage fell from Mother Bloodworth's chin into her mushroom soup, Belladonna had not been really hungry. Then there was the fuss about Ether Feedbag, who had a double bed and wanted to share it with her pig. And when Belladonna got to her room, at last there was still Doris in the bath, waving to her and wanting to be noticed. But it was none of that had worried Belladonna. It was the glimpse she had had, passing an open door, of Madame Olympia standing in a gold negligee, her black hair falling round her shoulders, the aardvark cowering at her feet. She was looking into the mirror, magic mirror, that had been left for Montmartre, and laughing, a low and truly evil sound. You wanted power and darkness, you wizard of the north. Belladonna heard her say, well, power and darkness you shall have. And it was with the sound of a new witch's horrible laughter still in her head that Belladonna fell asleep at last.
Okay. Chapter 8 or Chapter 5. Belladonna was still worried when she awoke. It seemed to her certain that Madame Olympia would win the competition and become Mrs. Hanker, and she feared most dreadfully for Ariman. She got up and went to the open window, and at once a family of glutens flew onto her shoulder and started telling her a long story about a nesting box that wasn't fit for a flea to sleep in, and the shocking way that people carried on, taking their milk bottles in too soon and keeping cats. Belladonna sighed. She could cope with one blue tit in her hair. The whole family always gave her a headache. You can stay, but in my straw basket, she said, managing for once to be firm. Doris, fortunately, was still asleep. Her body bleached, okay? We can't hear you. You're on mute.
Sorry, guys.
Yes, okay.
I thought the phone rang. To the whiteness of the bath, her vile eyes peacefully closed. Belladonna cleaned her teeth and went downstairs. The rooms were deserted and silent still. She didn't feel like the other witches this morning. She didn't feel like anybody. And slipping out of a side door into the street, she began to walk away from the hotel. She walked and walked and walked, letting her feet carry her where they would. Presently, she found that she had left the pleasant gardens and smart shops which surrounded the Grand Spa Hotel and was in a poor and slummy part of town where the houses were neglected and dirty, orange peel and broken glass littered the gutters, and mangy dogs foraged in the dustbins. She crossed a mean little square with a few dusty laurel bushes, a boarded up lemonade stall, and a public lavatory, and found herself in front of a large, gray building with curtains the color of bile. A flight of molted stone steps led from the side of the building into a patch of gravel, scuffed earth, which might have once been a garden. And there, hunched on a low wall which ran beside the pavement, was a small boy. He was looking down at something that he held cupped in his skinny hands and making the kind of noise that people make when they're trying not to cry.
Okay.
What was cupped in the boy's hands was an earthworm, and the name of the boy, a name he hated, was Terence Mugg. When he was a very small baby, Terence Mugg had been found wrapped in a newspaper in a telephone kiosk behind the railway station. The newspaper had smelt of vinegar, and the lady who found it had thought at first that it was a packet of fish and chips. However, when the fish and chips packet burst and put out a small pink hand, she screamed and ran for a policeman. At the police station, Terence was fed and clothed and photographed in the arms of a pretty police lady. But when his picture appeared in the paper, no one said, "Ooh," and "Ah," and "Isn't he sweet?" And no one wrote an offering to adopt him, though an old gentleman wrote in offering to adopt the police lady. Terence just wasn't that kind of baby. There were even people cruel enough to say they might have left him in a telephone kiosk themselves. So poor Terence was sent to the Sunnydine Children's Home in the most dismal part of Toadcaster, and Matron christened him Terence, after an actor she fancied at the time, and Mug, because she said, "With a mug like that, what else can he be called?" Babies in children's homes usually get adopted quite quickly.
Quickly, but not Terrence. Not only was he an unusually plain baby, but he spent the first 5 years of his life getting not only chickenpox and whooping cough, but really quite unusual things like brain fever and dermatitis and croup. Naturally, nobody wants to adopt a baby whose entire head is swathed in bandages or whose face is covered with spots, or who can't digest cheese without turning as yellow as a lentil. By the time he was 5 and had started at the local school, Terrence had quite given up hope of finding a family to love him. "We'll have that one with us for life," Matron would say nastily as Terrence crept past her like a battered little snail. "No Miss Wright's going to come along for him." People who are lonely and unloved often turn to animals for company, and that was what Terrence had done. Only, of course, at the Sunnydine Children's Home, Matron did not allow proper pets. So it was little things, small spiders and hurrying wood lice and shiny beetles that Terrence played with when he was out in the waste patch they called a garden, or found under paving stones on the way to school. It was in this way that he had found Rover. Rover was an earthworm, a pale pink, slender animal with a mauve bulge in the middle and pointed end, and a peaceful way of crawling along the ground. Terrence had liked him immediately. There was something a little special about Rover. He did not.
He did not seem quite like other worms, who often appear to have no notion of doing anything beyond burrowing down into the soil. Rover would curl into knots around Terrence's fingers or lie quietly in the palm of his hand, and sometimes he would rear up his pointed end in a most intelligent way. Terrence had found him in a tub of earth outside of a chemist's shop, and he sneaked him into the home and found a place for him in the garden, a jam jar filled with leaf mold, but which he was careful to keep damp because his teacher had told him that earthworms breathe through their skins and should never get dry. He buried the jam jar beneath a pile of bricks and told no one, only Billy, who was deaf and hadn't been adopted either. Billy was another person who didn't bother living things. And there, Rover had been as happy as anything until last night, when Matron had found Terence and Billy talking to him when they should have been inside getting ready for bed. "How dare you!" she shouted, charging down the garden like an ill-tempered camel. "Come on inside at once and throw that disgusting, unsanitary worm away immediately." When Terence did not instantly do what he was told, she snatched Rover's jar and turned it upside down, scuffling at the leaf mold and her sharp and spiky shoes.
She had hurt Rover, hurt him bad. He was no better this morning. There was a wound in his middle where his skin was broken, and his insides were spilling out in a terrible way. Rover wasn't moving either. He just lay there, perfectly still, and stretched in Terrence's hand. He was going to die.
Hello.
in a soft and musical voice above his head. And Terence, looking up, saw the most beautiful girl he had ever seen. A girl he would have been frightened of, except that her blue eyes looked sad, and sadness was something Terence knew about. My name is Belladonna, the gentle voice went on. What's yours? The little boy flustered. Terence Mugg, he said, staring up at her through his big steel-rimmed spectacles. And this, he swallowed, is Rover. Only, he said, keeping his voice steady with effort, I think he's going to die. Belladonna looked carefully at the worm. She did not think Rover was an odd name for an earthworm.
Okay. She knew at once that he was called Rover because Terence dreadfully wanted a dog and knew he would never get one. And she knew, too, that Terence was right about Rover. The worm was very, very sick. May I hold him for a moment? She asked. Terence hesitated. When somebody, excuse me, that belongs to you is going to die, you feel you should hold on to him and help him right to the end. But when he saw the look on Belladonna's face, he carefully opened his hand and gave her his worm. Belladonna bent over Rover, and her hair fell like a golden curtain, inside which the wounded worm lay snug and warm. Then she began to croon a little song. Terence had never heard it. Like
that's great.
that one before. Belladonna sang. It felt dampened and the soft darkness of the rich. It felt the patient worm who had turned it through the years. It was a song about pinkness and wetness and roundness, and while she sang it, Terence felt that he, too, was an earthworm and understood the of the earthworm and always would. Then she blew 3 times on her cupped hands and farted. Let's see what she said. Terence? The jagged place where Matron's shoe had hit the earthworm's side quite closed over. Rover's skin was smooth again. There was no scar. And even as, okay.
Terence gazed at him. Rover reared up his pointed end and in just the jaunty way he used to. Terence was possibly the ugliest little boy that Belladonna had ever seen, but now his face was shining like an angel's. He's better. He's all right again. You healed him. Oh, Rover, you're fine again, and you're better than before. He looked up at Belladonna. Only you didn't give him any medicine or anything. Are you a vet then? But his face was puzzled because he had seen vets and they did not look like Belladonna. No, not exactly, said Belladonna. But sometimes I can... She broke off and flinched. Quite the most unpleasant voice she had ever heard was coming at her from the top of the steps. Where's that drat boy? It whines, skulking in the garden again. Really, I don't know why they bother to fish him out of the telephone kiosk. He's been nothing but trouble since the day he arrived. The unpleasant voice belonged to a tall, bony woman with yellowish skin and a nose you could have cut cheese with. It's Matron, whispered Terence as he drew closer to Belladonna. Oh, there you are, you wretched boy. Well, come in at once, or you'll have no lunch. And if you've still got that slimy worm, I'm going to flush him down the toilet, the lavatory, and you after him.
Okay.
She began to charge down the steps, and Belladonna could feel Terence shrinking beside her. No, he said. Please, I'll put him away. Matron took no notice at all. She had reached the bottom step and was coming at them along the gravel path.
As for you,
Said, glaring at Belladonna,
I'd like to know what you're doing, trespassing in a private garden.
Will you take him? Terence whispered. Belladonna nodded and slipped Rover into her hand. Then she put her arm around Terence's shoulders. And as she felt the shivers that shook his thin little frame, a great anger shot through her. Belladonna was almost never angry, but she was very angry now. Very angry. Belladonna closed her eyes. She took a deep breath, and then she called on a god that light witches do not usually call on. Oh, great Cernunnos, you horned one, please help me halt this revolting woman! Matron was coming closer, closer still. Then, suddenly, she stumbled and looked back at her left foot. She tugged at it. She pulled. Nothing happened. Matron's left foot would not move. Oh, gasped Terence. Look! A little bulge had appeared at the tip of Matron's left shoe. Then the leather burst open, and a green root appeared and began to snake along the ground and bury itself in the soil.
From the side of the shoe came another root, and another. The roots grew thicker and stronger, gnarled as they were now, like the roots of an ancient beech, and always pushing down into the ground. Help, shrieked Matron. Help, eek. Oh, what's happening? It was happening on the other foot now. From her heels, her toes, her ankles, her knobby knees, roots that began soft and green became thicker and more twisted as they grew downward. Roots like giant creepers, like ropes, and all tethering Matron as if with hands of steel to the ground. Help, shrieked Matron again, but no one heard her. And now the roots were coming out of her waist, her arms, and then she could shriek no more because a tendril had sprung out of her upper lip and was snaking down towards the ground, closing her mouth as firmly as a trap. Oh, said Terence once again. He was still nestling against her skirt, but when Belladonna looked down, he saw that he wasn't frightened, just amazed. You did it, said Terence. I know you did it. You're magic, aren't you? You're a witch. Belladonna nodded. She too was very much excited because rooting people to the ground is magic, all right, but it's not really very white. Rooting a begonia or a cabbage or a clump of wallflowers is white.
Okay.
Because begonias and cabbages and clumps of wallflowers like to have roots and cannot live without them. But rooting matrons is a very different matter. If it wasn't exactly black magic, it was certainly fairly gray, and Belladonna's eyes were shining as she looked at Terence. You brought me luck, she said. And you and Rover. That's the blackest thing I've done, ever. You mean you really do white magic? Like healing people and so on? Said Terence. It struck Belladonna that he seemed to have a natural feeling for magic, and not to show any of the fears one would expect in a nervous boy. But do you want to be black? Yes, I do. I do terribly, said Belladonna. And she explained about the competition in Ariman. She was too shy to tell Terence that she loved Ariman, but she thought he had probably guessed. He was that kind of little boy. Suddenly a thought struck her. Terence, do you think? She looked down at the worms, and now distinctly perky and inclined to tie himself into knots around her finger. You don't think that Rover, that he might be a familiar? I never had one, you know. The other witches did, but I didn't. Do you think? Belladonna was growing very excited now. Do you think because holding Rover that I managed to root Matron? It might be, Terence was excited, just as excited as she was.
Okay.
Up, you're on mute.
Only I thought familiars were usually black cats and hares and goats and things. Oh no, said Belladonna, explaining about the octopus called Doris and Madame Olympia's aardvark and the cloud of flies. He's so little, said Terence. There was a pause, broken only by a furious, suffocating grunt from Matron, up whose legs a large black spider was steadily marching. But if he's helped you, Terence went on bravely, then you must have him. Take him with you so you'll win the competition. Belladonna was incredibly touched. I couldn't, Terence. I couldn't separate you two. You belong together. Anyway, I hadn't a hope of winning the competition even so. But Terence now was clutching her arm and looking up at her with his eyes pleading. If you couldn't separate us, couldn't you? Oh, please, please, couldn't you take me with you? Witches have servants. I know they do. Imps and fiends and things. I'd do anything for you. Anything. Oh, Terence, I'd love to, but how can I? I'm staying in this posh hotel and they'd never let you come. And anyway, witches don't really mix the ordinary people, you know? It could be right. But her voice trailed away as she said it. For what was right for Terence about the Sunnydean's children's?
Oh. And what would happen to him when Matron stopped being rooted? Belladonna had absolutely no idea how long the spell would last, and the glitter in Matron's eyes as she shrugged uselessly at her roots boded extremely ill for Terence. Terence did not say anything. He just stood there, dejected and beaten, but still holding on to her. Oh, heck, said Belladonna suddenly, making up her mind. Let's just do it. It may come right. He climbed over the low wall and turned, stretching out a hand to Terence. Then, followed by the string of grunts of the rooted matron, they ran together down the road. Okay.
Chapter 6. When Belladonna got back to the hotel, she took Terence straight to the manager's office to see Mr. Leadbetter and the org. She found them in a bad way. There had been a row about Ethel Feedback's pig, which was not house-trained, and when the manager complained, Ethel, who had not been well brought up, said, "Oh, go and teach your grandma to suck eggs." Unfortunately, she had been touching her hazel wand at the time, and the next moment the manager found himself in a nursing home in Bexhill-on-the-Sea, holding out a raw egg to his mother, a frail old lady who had been looking forward to her morning porridge and was very much annoyed.
I keep trying to tell you, you got in the
The muddle had taken a long time to clear up, and then it discovered that Mother Bloodwort, who had
been riding up and down in the hotel lift all morning, had got jammed between floors. Trying to remember the spell for making things go up in the air, she had gotten mixed up and become a coffee table once again. And since coffee tables cannot press emergency buttons, it caused a great deal of trouble to the engineers. But when they saw Belladonna, the secretary and the ogre both cheered up and greeted Terence most politely. Belladonna lost no time in explaining about Terence and the horrible home. "And he's brought this absolutely marvelous familiar," she went on. "He made me able to do a really quite dark thing. Me!" The ogre and Mr. Ledbetter looked round the room, wondering if they had missed a stampeding buffalo or a wolverine with slavering fangs. But all they could see was a small and skinny boy, his gaze fixed, wonderingly, on the ogre's single eye. "Show them, Terence," said Belladonna. So Terence felt in his pocket and lifted out Rover and put him carefully down on Mr. Ledbetter's blotter. The secretary and the ogre bent over him, and their hearts sank. A small, pale worm, whose bristles, as he crawled across the paper, made a delicate sloughing noise like autumn leaves stirred by the softest of winds. For a moment, they'd really hoped.
Okay.
Shall I try the typewriter? Belladonna asked eagerly. Like you wanted me to yesterday? A nest of vipers, wasn't it? Come on, Terrence. So Terrence picked up Rover and stood beside her, and Belladonna rested her fingertips lightly on the little worm's mauve and slightly bulgy middle and closed her eyes. And lo and behold, the typewriter vanished with a puff. And there on the desk was a writhing mass of hissing vipers and darting tongues and slitty yellow eyes. Poor little thing, said Belladonna, forgetting her blackness for a moment. They look awfully dry. Vipers is born dry, said Lester, so don't you go fretting yourself. But the look he exchanged with Mr. Ledbetter was eager and excited. If Belladonna could get black so quickly, there was hope yet. Amazing, said Mr. Ledbetter. He looked at Rover again to see if he had missed anything. A hidden poison sac, a lethal sting. But the worm now crawling peaceably up Terrence's sleeve was exactly what he seemed. Gentle, modest, and moist. So I was wondering, said Belladonna, putting her arm around Terrence's shoulder, if Terrence could possibly stay for a bit. Rover belongs to him, and though he offered to give him to me, I just couldn't take him away.
Mr. Ledbetter looked worried. What would the manager say to another guest? And what about the other witches? Would it start an absolute avalanche of witch friends and relations coming to stay at the hotel? Fishy little rats and quarreling shouter cousins and small feed bags and nasty Wellington boots. Terrence said nothing. He just stood there, waiting. He was not a boy who had ever hoped for much. Mr. Ledbetter cleared his throat. It so happens, it began, that I have a sister, Amalia. Her name is Amalia Ledbetter. The ogre and Belladonna looked at him anxiously. They knew how hard he had been working, and the overwork can drive people a little mad. She didn't, in fact, marry, Mr. Ledbetter went on, but she might have done. There was a swimming bath attendant who was very fond of her. The others waited. I'm not saying the swimming bath attendant was called Mug, the secretary went on, because he wasn't. His name actually was Arthur Hurtleypoo. I remember it because jokes were made about Hurtleypooing into the pool. that kind of thing. Still, if he had been called Mug, and if he had married my sister Amalia, and if the marriage had been blessed with a son, then this son, finished the secretary, would undoubtedly have been my nephew.
Your nephew, Terrence, said Belladonna, seeing the light. Precisely. And what more natural than my sister Amelia having to go into hospital to have her appendix out, and should send Terrence to stay with me. Oh, Mr. Ledbetter, you're wonderful, cried Belladonna, throwing her arms around the secretary, a thing he very much enjoyed. Terrence looked as though he'd swallowed a lighted candle, but when he spoke, it was to say haltedly, if I was your nephew, shouldn't I have... He was too shy to finish, but his eyes went to the back of Mr. Ledbetter and lingered there. The secretary was a modest man, so much so that he usually wore his stump inside his trousers, and Terrence was a boy who noticed things. A tail, said Mr. Ledbetter. Terrence nodded. I could make him a little one, said Belladonna, even without Rover. Making tails is growing magic, and there's nothing whiter than that. But I don't know. I feel Terrence is sort of perfect as he is. Terrence looked up quickly. Surely Belladonna was mocking him. But no, her periwinkle eyes were very clear and very loving as she looked at him, and he had turned away because a lump had come in his throat. Quite honestly, Terrence, said Mr. Ledbetter, if
you can manage without one, it would be better. There is, you see, the problem of sitting down. And my sister Amelia, your mother, that would be, was perfectly tailless, as far as I can recall. Terence didn't keep on about it after that. To be able to be near Belladonna, to know that his worm might help her to gain her heart's desire, was happiness enough. Only someone really greedy and undisciplined would also expect a tail. I'll tell you one thing, though, said Lester. I wouldn't say anything about Rover being such a powerful familiar. I'd let Terence look after Rover and pretend he was just a pet. That's what I do. If it gets around that Rover's giving Belladonna even half a chance of winning the competition, I wouldn't give a fig for his chances. Oh no, surely not. No one would hurt an innocent worm like that, said Belladonna. Now, Belladonna, try thinking black as well as acting it. There's really been some hanky-panky with Doris. Lurching about back, drunk in the Lord, and a nasty green color with it. Mrs. Rex saying Doris never touched a drop and someone must have forced it down her throat. Poor Doris, is she all right now? Cried Belladonna. Well, it seems she'd been on the bath salts, but it's okay.
Just so, said Lester darkly. I wouldn't trust any of those witches as far as I could throw them, let alone that Madame Olympia. A chill spread around the room as they remembered the enchantress' cruel smile and the necklace of human teeth. And what about those shouter chickens? You know how they follow you about. Won't pick at Rover, and you'll be back at bloomin' begonias, the ogre went on. Belladonna saw the sense of this. They wouldn't mean to, of course. They'd feel dreadful afterward. Oh, but all the same. She turned to Terence. All right, you shall be Rover's bodyguard and keep him. And when I want to do some magic, you can come over and stand beside me, and I'll touch Rover without anyone seeing. That's the ticket, said or whatever. It was decided that Terence would sleep on a camp bed in Mr. Ledbetter's room and make himself useful generally until it was time to go to Darkington. And when Belladonna had turned the vipers back into typewriter again, he and Karen went to wash their hands for lunch. In the afternoon, Mr. Ledbetter took the witches to the big department store called Turnbull and Buttle to buy the long black gowns and hoods that they were to wear
for the competition. He had hoped to have Lester to help him, but Ariman had sent for the ogre, spiriting him away just as he was about to lift a spoonful of banana fritter to his mouth, and it was Mr. Ledbetter alone who had to shepherd the witches up to the third floor and stop Mabel Rack from leaping onto the fish slab and return the cigarettes that had mysteriously flown through the air into the handbags of the Shouter twins, and explain to the young man behind the glove counter that he couldn't immediately marry Belladonna. Fortunately, the gowns were waiting for them. Black ones with hoods like school teachers used to wear, and long enough to reach right down to the ground and cover Mother Bloodwort's slippers and Ethel Feedback's wellies, so that with the black carnival masks which Turnbull and Buttle had ordered specially, there really was no way of telling which witch was which. But when it came to Madame Olympia's turn to try on her gown, she made a nasty scene. All day the enchantress had kept snootily to her room, insisting that meals be sent up to her, ordering incredible delicacies for the aardvark, and putting out 17 pairs of shoes for the poor boot boy to clean. Now she looked at her plain cotton gown and said, "Are you out of your mind? Do you imagine I can perform magic in that rag?"
I'm afraid all the witches have to be dressed alike, said Mr. Ledbetter. It's one of the rules of the competition. Then the rules must be broken, said the enchantress, fixing Mr. Ledbetter with an evil and glittering eye. It is impossible to say what would have happened next, but just at that moment, Mother Bloodwort, who had been resting on a low gilt chair, gave a shriek of excitement. It's me toe! Me big toe! It's happened! I can feel it! Belladonna put down her gown and hurried over to her. What has Mother Bloodwort? It's my turning myself young again spell. I've been working on it all week, and just now the big toe gave the sputter. More of a spurt it was, really. Like a spring chicken it felt, raring to go. She began to scramble under her musky skirt, removed her stockings, shook off a couple of the small gray bandages which clung like dead mice around her ankles, and stuck her naked foot into the air. The stunned shop assistants drew closer and witches clustered around. It is pinker than the others, I'm almost sure, said Belladonna at last, and sort of fuller looking.
Okay.
Rubbish, said Nancy Shrouder. It's exactly like the others and nasty with it. You made the whole thing up, said Mabel Rack, pulling her cod-like lips. And your toenails need cutting. The unkind remarks of the other witches came thick and fast. It had to be admitted that Mother Bloodwort's toe did look exactly like the others, yellow and bent with little tufty hairs. But Mother Bloodwort was not to be put down. You'll see one day, all of you. When I get the rest of the spell, you'll see. You'll be young. You'll have to put me in nappies. But she allowed Belladonna to help her on with her stockings and led her back to the bus. It had been rather an exciting day. When Lester found himself spirited away to Darkington in the middle of his banana fritter, he'd been feeling that his master was up to no good, and he was right. Ariman had sent for him to tell him that the witches couldn't stay at the hall during the competition. Sir, began Lester. Ariman was in the library, waved his hand. Don't try to persuade me, Lester. Even if they stay in the East Wing you had suggested, even if you've completely covered in their hoods and gowns, I just can't face it.
Okay.
Lester tried not to show it, but he was annoyed. It seemed to him that Ariman was doing everything he could to make the contest as difficult as possible. After all, if you wanted a black witch, what was the use of fussing about a few warts with whiskers on them or a sea slug over someone's eye? For a moment he wondered whether to mention Madame Olympia. Ariman hadn't seen her yet, and she might be more his type. About Belladonna, he decided to say nothing. The disappointment if she didn't win would be bad enough without raising any hopes. Well, where are they to stay then? He asked. Ariman brightened. I have a good idea. I want them to camp in the West Meadow, the one opposite the main gate. They'll be out of the way there. Just buy everything you need. Those pretty orange tents with the light plastic porches, the camp stoves, and those cunning canoe lavatories. Buy everything, he said grandly, and send the bill to me. But it's October, and they'll be freezing. No, not at all. Braced is what they'll be, toned up. Those nylon sleeping bags are very good, I hear. You'll have to excuse me now, Lester. I have the judges arriving tonight. As he came away from the library, Lester met Wizard Watcher. How do you find him? said the left head.
All his chumps, said the ogre. Wants the witches to camp in the West Meadow. Won't have them in the house. The monster sighed. He's taken it hard, said the middle head. You can imagine how we feel letting down. Still, if the wizard didn't come it, what would we do? Remarked the left head. And come it, he definitely didn't, the right head said. The monster then told Lester that it had asked for a holiday during the actual contest. It was just going to take a rucksack and go walk about. We'll be back for the wedding, of course, said the middlehead, but everyone will be better for a break. Lester nodded. He could see that, in spite of itself, the wizard watcher felt it had somehow failed in its task and wanted to be alone till it felt better. It's Sir Simon, he said. Seems to me the old man think a bit too much of him, eh? He had no sooner spoke than there was a ring that followed by the creak of leather and hollow gloomy spectre of the wife's there passing through them in the corridor. On to watch the old man noshing, said the middle head disapprovingly. Thick as thieves they are, said the left head. Okay.
Gets me down all that beating his blinking forehead, complained the right head. I mean, if you've murdered your wives, you've murdered them and that's it. Lester's great craggy brow so furrowed that the eye patch seemed to be riding a storm-tossed sea. I don't like it, he said. There's something fishy going on between those two, you mark my words. He sighed and pulled a saber out of an umbrella stand, and there was never anything decent to swallow at the hotel. Ready, sir? He called upstairs to Ariman, and with a whoosh, he was gone.
Okay, we are going to stop right there.
Yay.
Awesome.
Fun. It's a fun story. Definitely
It
different.
is.
really
It a fun
is.
story. Yeah.
It really is
I
a
was
fun
not expecting the worm. That came out of nowhere.
Yeah, I
Right?
know that worm for a
Yeah,
familiar.
but I didn't know where they were going with the worm, but
Very
and then
unusual.
I was not expecting the worm.
Very unusual
Yeah.
familiar, but I have a feeling this worm is really going to turn things around for everybody.
I would like to know what happened to the matron. Like, did she stay
Wait,
a
wait.
tree?
Did you just make a tequila joke?
Uh-huh.
Like when the worm turns?
Mhm.
Wow.
Oh God. I got your humor there.
Wait a minute, I didn't even know I did. Are y'all talking about me? See,
Oh, Amy.
went over my head. Let
When
me
the worm
stop
turns.
recording.